In January 2026, the U.S. government's official gold holdings stand at 8,133 metric tons. On their books, this gold is recorded at $422 per ounce, the statutory valuation established in 1973. Today's actual market price exceeds $4,600 per ounce. Calculate the implications. This represents a concealed asset valued at more than $1.2 trillion at present market rates, yet recorded at merely $11 billion. We're looking at a $1.19 trillion disparity between the official accounting and market reality. Historical evidence suggests they're positioning to eliminate this gap instantaneously through official revaluation. Those holding cash during this event will find themselves on the wrong side of America's most substantial wealth redistribution in history. This isn't mere conjecture. This scenario has occurred previously on 2 occasions. Each time, those holding paper currency were devastated, while the government escaped overwhelming debt obligations. April 5, 1933. President Roosevelt declares private gold ownership unlawful via Executive Order 6102. American citizens face mandatory surrender of their gold at $20.67 per ounce. 9 months later, in January 1934, the government officially revalues that gold to $35 per ounce. This represents a 69% immediate profit for the Treasury, with zero benefit for citizens who were compelled to relinquish it. They received $20.67. The government promptly revalued it to $35. Instantaneous wealth redistribution. August 15, 1971. President Nixon terminates the gold window, ending dollar convertibility to gold. Gold's official price was $35 per ounce. Within 9 years, the market valuation skyrocketed to $850 per ounce. This represents a 2,329% increase. Those holding physical gold saw their wealth multiply 23 times. Those holding dollars or bonds were devastated by the subsequent inflation. There exists a precise 4-phase pattern governments employ when debt becomes mathematically impossible to repay. This pattern has been executed twice in contemporary American history and has never failed to reach completion once initiated. Stage 3 is already finished. We're awaiting Stage 4. The pattern is straightforward. Actually, it's mathematically foreseeable. 4 clear stages, every single occurrence. Once you perceive the pattern distinctly, you'll comprehend precisely what's approaching and why it's inescapable. Stage 1. Government debt reaches a critical level, generally between 90 and 130% of GDP. The debt builds through warfare, financial crises, and spending initiatives that appear politically essential but mathematically unsustainable. Eventually, the government performs the calculations and confronts a harsh reality. They cannot settle this debt through taxation exclusively. That would demand tax rates so extreme they would destroy the economy. They cannot achieve growth sufficient to overcome it, because economic expansion is slower than debt accumulation. They cannot simply create money to eliminate it, because that triggers hyperinflation, destroying the currency's value and generating social disorder. They're cornered. Debt too large to settle. No traditional solutions available. That's Stage 1. Stage 2, the dollar loses credibility or actively risks losing its position as the global reserve currency. Foreign governments, foreign central banks, and international investors begin genuinely questioning the stability and prospective value of the dollar. They seek to exchange their dollar holdings for something tangible, something concrete. In 1933, it manifested as domestic bank panics. American citizens demanded physical gold from banks due to distrust. In 1971, it was foreign governments, France under Charles de Gaulle, Germany, Switzerland, all demanding physical gold in return for their dollar reserves. Today, in 2026, China and Russia are aggressively accumulating gold reserves while simultaneously advancing yuan-denominated trade, gold-backed settlement mechanisms, anything diminishing dollar dependence. When this skepticism begins spreading, capital exodus begins. Money flows away from dollar-denominated assets because sophisticated investors refuse to maintain a currency visibly losing credibility and purchasing capital. Stage 3. Government gold reserves remain entirely unchanged while the national debt grows exponentially. The United States has maintained exactly 8,133 metric tons of gold since 1971. This figure hasn't changed in 55 years. The gold remains in Fort Knox, West Point Depository, and New York Federal Reserve vaults. Officially, on the Treasury's ledgers, it's still valued at the statutory rate of approximately $422 per ounce. But the actual market valuation is currently $4,600 per ounce. That's 109 times greater than the official book valuation. The government possesses a massive concealed asset exceeding $1.2 trillion in genuine market value that doesn't appear on the balance sheet at current valuations. It exists, it's tangible, it's simply valued using 1973 accounting methods. Stage 4. The revaluation event. The Treasury marks its gold to market through official policy implementation. Here's the mechanism, and it's devastatingly simple. The Treasury Secretary, coordinating with the Federal Reserve, officially revalues gold to reflect current or anticipated market valuations. Let's examine a scenario. Suppose they revalue it to $20,000 per ounce as component of a new monetary framework. You calculate 8,133 tons multiplied by 32,150 ounces per metric ton. That equals 261.5 million ounces multiplied by $20,000 per ounce. This generates $5.23 trillion in immediate value on the government's balance sheet, usable to eliminate existing debt, recapitalize the banking infrastructure, support an expanded money supply, or anchor a new gold-backed digital currency.
This isn't a market occurrence happening gradually, it's a policy determination happening instantaneously. Executive order, emergency legislation, Treasury proclamation, no public warning, no prolonged deliberation, just implementation. By the time you learn about it through news channels, it's already accomplished and you've already missed the opportunity to position yourself. Now let's analyze how this exact pattern, all 4 stages, unfolded in 1933 and again in 1971, so you can perceive with absolute certainty what's approaching in 2026 or 2027. If this framework is resonating and you're beginning to recognize the pattern, press that like button immediately and subscribe, because most individuals will not comprehend what is transpiring until it's already concluded and their wealth has been redistributed. October 1929. The stock market collapses. Banks start failing in succession. By early 1933, the United States government confronts an existential debt and deflation emergency. It's not merely elevated debt relative to GDP, it's an absolute systemic catastrophe. Banks are failing, deflation is spiraling uncontrollably, and American citizens are stockpiling physical gold because they fundamentally distrust paper currency and the banking infrastructure. Roosevelt assumes office in March 1933 with an explicit authorization to implement something drastic to halt the collapse. Here's how stages 1 through 3 had already materialized by that moment. Stage 1. Government debt catastrophe. The Depression obliterated tax revenues while relief expenditure exploded. The mathematics didn't function. Stage 2. Citizens forfeit confidence in the dollar and banking system. Bank panics intensify nationwide. Everyone attempts converting their paper dollars into physical gold. The Federal Reserve hemorrhages gold reserves at an untenable rate. Stage 3. The government faces insolvency. It cannot finance programs. It cannot satisfy obligations. The gold reserves sit at 8,133 tons, but they're officially valued at only $20.67 per ounce on the government's books. The figures don't reconcile. The system is fracturing. Then arrives stage 4, the revaluation. But first, they must obtain the gold from the citizens. April 5, 1933, Roosevelt executes Executive Order 6102. This is the confiscation. The The order mandates that all American citizens must surrender their gold coins, gold bars, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve. You're permitted to retain a maximum of $100 worth of gold coins, and that's exclusively for collectible or numismatic purposes. Everything else must be relinquished. The penalty for non-compliance? $10,000, in 1933 equivalent to roughly $230,000 today, or 10 years in federal prison or both. There were limited exceptions: gold used in legitimate industrial applications, dentistry, jewelry manufacturing, but for ordinary citizens maintaining gold as savings or as a value store, the directive was unambiguous: surrender it immediately or face prosecution. And people obeyed. They believed they were being patriotic, helping their country during crisis. Then 9 months later, January 30th, 1934, arrives the Revaluation. The government enacts the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. The official gold price increases from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. That's a 69.3% increase overnight by government declaration. The Treasury just realized an enormous paper profit. All that gold they compelled citizens to surrender at $20.67 is now officially valued at $35 on the government's books, and they utilize that massively higher valuation to recapitalize the Federal Reserve System and to support a dramatically expanded money supply to combat deflation. Here's the wealth transfer dissected. Citizens who surrendered their gold received $20.67 per ounce. The government immediately revalued that exact identical gold to $35 per ounce. Citizens forfeited 41% of the value instantly, but it deteriorates further over time. The government then inflates the money supply aggressively throughout the 1930s and 1940s, utilizing the new higher gold valuation as justification and backing. Inflation from 1933 through 1945 steadily, relentlessly erodes the purchasing power of those dollars citizens received for their gold. Citizens are left maintaining depreciating paper currency. Meanwhile, the government maintains appreciating gold and inflates away the Depression-era debt burden. The pattern executed flawlessly. 1933, the crisis arrives. Debt crisis and bank panics. April 1933, the government confiscates gold from the population. January 1934, the government officially revalues gold upward by 69%. 1934 to 1945, they inflate the money supply and systematically erode the debt. The outcome, the government successfully escapes the debt trap. Citizens holding dollars witnessed their purchasing power steadily deteriorate. The population didn't anticipate it. They believed they were fulfilling their patriotic obligation, saving the nation by relinquishing their gold. Instead, they unknowingly financed their own financial devastation. Stage 4 executed perfectly, and it's the exact identical mechanism we're about to witness again. Now let's examine 1971, because the pattern repeated with a different approach but identical outcome. 1944, Bretton Woods Conference. Representatives from 44 allied nations establish an entirely new post-war monetary infrastructure. The U.S. dollar becomes pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Every other major currency pegs to the dollar. Critically, foreign central banks can redeem their dollars for actual physical gold at that fixed $35 rate. For approximately 20 years, the system operates, but then the 1960s emerge. Vietnam War, massive military expenditure, Great Society domestic programs. The U.S. government begins creating far more dollars than its gold reserves can credibly support at $35 per ounce. By 1971, stages 1 through 3 are clearly underway. Stage 1, U.S. government debt is climbing rapidly. Stage 2, dollar credibility among foreign governments is deteriorating. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, begins aggressively demanding physical gold in exchange for their dollar reserves. Germany follows. Switzerland follows. The UK follows. Everyone desires gold, not dollars. By August 1971, the United States has approximately 10,000 metric tons of gold remaining to support an exploding supply of dollars circulating globally in foreign possession. The mathematics is breaking.
too many dollars created, insufficient gold to support them at $35. The Bretton Woods system is failing in real time. August 15th, Sunday evening, President Nixon appears on national television and delivers a shocking announcement. He characterizes it as a temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. The gold window closes. Foreign governments can no longer redeem dollars for gold. The dollar becomes a pure fiat currency supported by nothing tangible except U.S. government assurances and America's military dominance, particularly control of global oil markets through the petrodollar system.
What transpired next is absolutely essential to understanding the pattern. Immediate dollar devaluation against gold. The official price remains frozen at $35 per ounce on paper, but the market price, once gold is permitted to float freely, explodes. 1971, $35 per ounce official. 1974, $195 per ounce. That's 5.6 times higher in just 3 years. 1980, $850 per ounce peak. That's 24 times the old official Bretton Woods price, a 2,329% gain in just 9 years. The mechanism this occasion was different from 1933. No direct confiscation was necessary because the government already controlled the gold reserves. They didn't need to seize it from citizens. Instead, the mark-to-market revaluation occurred through market forces after the peg was broken. The government's 8,133 tons of gold exploded in market value from $11 billion at $35 to over $275 billion at the 1980 peak. Even though the dollar was no longer formally supported by gold under Bretton Woods, the government retained those massive reserves as a psychological anchor and strategic asset while they expanded the money supply dramatically. Meanwhile, they inflated away the Vietnam War debt and Great Society obligations throughout the entire decade of the 1970s. Inflation operated at 10 to 14% annually for years. Here's the wealth transfer outcome. Citizens holding cash, bonds, or any fixed dollar-denominated assets forfeited approximately 80% of their real purchasing power during the 1970s decade. Citizens who maintained physical gold gained 2,329% from the $35 official price to the $850 peak. And the government? They inflated away the debt while their gold reserves appreciated massively in real market value, even though they didn't liquidate it. The fundamental difference from 1933. In 1933, the government confiscated gold first, then revalued it upward afterward. In 1971, the government closed the conversion window first, then permitted the market to revalue gold dramatically higher. But here's the critical prediction for what's approaching in 2026 or 2027. The government will likely revalue gold officially and suddenly, excluding citizens from the gains before most people even comprehend what's transpiring. They've learned from both historical episodes. They won't need to confiscate this time because most Americans don't possess physical gold anyway. They'll simply revalue it through policy, potentially as component of a new gold-backed digital dollar or a debt restructuring. By the time it's announced, the opportunity to position will already be gone. Same 4-stage pattern, different execution methodology, but the outcome is always identical. The government escapes the debt trap, and the population holding paper currency gets systematically devastated. So now, let's apply this historical pattern to what's transpiring right now in January 2026. Let's methodically verify each stage. Stage 1. Is U.S. debt at a critical threshold? January 2026. U.S. national debt is $38 trillion. The debt-to-GDP ratio is 128%. Let me provide that in historical perspective. That's dramatically higher than 1933, when it was around 40% of GDP. Much higher than 1971, when it was just 35% of GDP. Higher than the 2008 financial crisis, when it reached 64%. We are in unprecedented territory, and it's accelerating. Annual interest payments on the debt alone are now $1.2 trillion per year. That's more than the entire defense budget, more than Medicare expenditure. It's becoming the largest single line item in the federal budget. The mathematical unsustainability is undeniable. The government cannot raise taxes sufficiently to cover this, politically impossible and economically destructive. They cannot reduce spending enough because entitlements plus defense spending equals over 75% of the total budget, untouchable politically. They cannot grow their way out of it. You'd need 6 to 7% sustained GDP growth to outpace 7% average interest on new debt. We are achieving 2 to 3% growth. The mathematics doesn't function. The only realistic options remaining are devalue the currency or default, and devaluation through gold revaluation is the historical playbook they've utilized twice before. Stage 1, check, verified, we're there. Stage 2, is the dollar losing or actively threatening to lose reserve currency? The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus new members, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran, and Ethiopia, are aggressively pursuing alternatives. They launched the unit currency in January 2026 for trade settlement, 40% backed by gold. Saudi Arabia is no longer exclusively trading oil in dollars. Since 2023, they've been accepting Chinese yuan for oil sales. That's the petrodollar system fracturing. China holds officially 2,264 tons of gold, but independent estimates suggest the real number exceeds 5,000 tons, accumulated through non-official channels. Russia holds 2,332 tons, officially. Central bank gold acquisition globally reached levels not witnessed since the 1960s and 1970s. According to IMF data, the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves is in structural decline. Year 2000, 71% of reserves held in dollars. Year 2026, 58% and falling consistently. This is the exact identical pattern signal we observed in 1971. Back then, France and Germany demanded gold for dollars, exposing the system's weakness. Now, China, Russia, and increasingly other nations are de-dollarizing trade flows and building gold reserves as insurance against dollar collapse. When foreign governments actively distrust your currency and are constructing alternatives, the revaluation is approaching. Stage 2, check, verified, we're there. Stage 3, are government gold reserves static while debt explodes? U.S. official gold reserves, 8,133.46 metric tons. That exact number hasn't changed since 1971, 55 years. The gold is physically stored in these locations: Fort Knox, Kentucky, 4,582 tons. West Point Depository, New York, 1,682 tons. Denver Mint, 1,264 tons. New York Federal Reserve, 418 tons. On the Treasury's official books, this gold remains valued at the statutory price of $422 per ounce. That was established in 1973 and never updated. But the real current market value at $4,600 per ounce, $1.2 trillion. Here's the hidden asset, the ammunition for revaluation. At the current market price of $4,600 per ounce, those 8,133 tons represent $1.2 trillion in real value. If the government officially revalues gold to $10,000 per ounce, that becomes $2.6 trillion on the balance sheet. If they revalue to $20,000 per ounce, that's $5.2 trillion. If they revalue to $30,000 per ounce, that's $7.8 trillion. At a $20,000 revaluation, that's sufficient to retire approximately 14% of the entire national debt in one policy move. The government is positioned with an asset that could substantially address the debt crisis. All they require is the political crisis that justifies the emergency action and the policy mechanism to execute it. The precedent exists: 1933, 1971. The legal framework exists: the Gold Reserve Act, Federal Reserve Act, Executive Authority. Stage 3, check, verified, we're there. Stage 4, is the revaluation being actively prepared? Look at the quiet signals and infrastructure being constructed. In 2023, an internal Treasury Department report mentioned modernizing the gold certificate ratio. That's bureaucratic language for revaluation preparation. The Federal Reserve Act already explicitly allows the Treasury Secretary to establish the official gold price. The legal authority exists. There had been increasing discussions in policy and academic circles about alternative reserve asset frameworks and hard asset backing for central bank digital currencies. Key phrase appearing repeatedly. Gold is Tier 1 capital under Basel III international banking regulations. That's the regulatory infrastructure for banks to hold gold as a primary reserve asset, which supports a revaluation scenario. The infrastructure for revaluation is being constructed in plain sight. Most people just don't recognize what they're witnessing. What are the most likely trigger events that could precipitate the revaluation? A major dollar crisis, loss of reserve currency accelerates, triggering capital flight. A debt ceiling political standoff that threatens actual default. A failed treasury bond auction where there aren't enough buyers at sustainable rates. A major geopolitical shock, war, particularly in the Middle East or Taiwan, disrupting dollar flows. A complete breakdown of the BRICS alternative system, forcing a U.S. policy response. Or perhaps simply the national debt crosses $40 trillion, creating a psychological breaking point that forces action. Here are the possible revaluation scenarios and mechanisms. Scenario A, domestic revaluation for debt management. The Federal Reserve and Treasury announce a joint policy action. They officially mark to market the gold reserves at a new price, $15,000 to $25,000 per ounce. This creates $3.9 to $6.5 trillion in new balance sheet value. They utilize it to directly retire a portion of Treasury debt or to support a massive expansion of the money supply, and both. The result? The dollar devalues significantly against gold and hard assets. Gold holders are protected. Cash holders lose purchasing power. Scenario B, international gold-backed digital currency system. BRICS nations successfully launch and expand their gold-backed unit currency. The U.S. is forced to respond competitively or risk losing reserve currency entirely and permanently. More likely, the government announces an overnight revaluation to $25,000 per ounce and offers to purchase gold from citizens at that price, but restricts access and availability. Retail gold supplies disappear instantly. Premiums explode to 50 to 100% over spot. The window of opportunity closes before average citizens can acquire any. By the time you hear about it on the news, it's already too late to act. So what's the realistic timing? Let's look at historical precedent for how rapidly this moves. 1933, economic crisis became acute in late 1932. Gold confiscation occurred April 1933. Revaluation occurred January 1934. Total timeline, approximately 14 months from crisis to action. 2016, the debt crisis is already present and acute. Debt at 128% of GDP. Foreign treasury sales accelerating. The likely timeline, 12 to 18 months, meaning sometime between mid-2026 and early 2028. What are the specific catalysts and indicators to watch obsessively? A debt ceiling crisis showdown. These occur every 12 to 24 months. The next major one could be the trigger. A major bank failure. Stress tests are already showing vulnerabilities in regional banks with commercial real estate exposure. The U.S. dollar index, DXY, breaking critical support levels. If DXY drops decisively below 95, that signals serious loss of confidence. Gold breaking $5,000 per ounce. That's the psychological threshold that indicates markets are pricing in currency crisis. Treasury yields spiking despite Fed policy. If 10-year yields exceed 5.5 to 6%, that's a red flag that buyers are disappearing. Here's the wealth transfer mathematics. Pay attention because this is your entire financial future. Scenario: You possess physical gold purchased at $4,600 in January 2026. The government announces a revaluation to $20,000 in 2027. Your gold just gained 335% in dollar terms overnight. But more importantly, your purchasing power is preserved in real terms while everyone else's collapses.
If you possess no gold, you're holding dollars, dollar-denominated bonds, cash and savings accounts. The dollar devalues 77% against gold in real terms. Your purchasing power collapses. You're holding depreciating paper during the largest wealth transfer in modern history. The pattern always completes. It doesn't require your belief. It doesn't require your understanding. It doesn't require your participation. It simply executes based on mathematical inevitability. The British population didn't see the pound devaluation coming in 1931. The American population didn't see the gold confiscation coming in 1933. The global population didn't see the Nixon shock coming in 1971, but the pattern executed anyway. Every day you delay positioning is one day closer to the revaluation event. Once it's announced, the opportunity is gone. This is not prediction. This is pattern recognition applied to current conditions. Let's summarize the complete evidence. 1933, debt crisis leads to gold confiscation, then official revaluation up 69%, then systematic inflation to erode the debt. Pattern completes. Government escapes debt. Citizens holding cash lose massively. 1971, debt crisis leads to closing the gold window, then market revaluation up 2,329% over 9 years, then systematic inflation to erode the debt. Pattern completes. Government escapes debt. Citizens holding cash lose massively. 2026, debt crisis at 128% of GDP, dollar losing reserve status to BRICS alternatives, gold reserves static at 8,133 tons for 55 years, revaluation mathematically necessary and historically precedented. The pattern is completing right now. The mechanism is mathematical and political, not conspiratorial. When government debt exceeds 120 to 130% of GDP and cannot be repaid through conventional means, when the dollar loses or threatens to lose reserve currency status, when the government holds substantial gold reserves at an absurdly outdated official valuation, the revaluation becomes not just likely, but inevitable. It's not a matter of if, it's purely a matter of when and at what price level. Here's what you need to understand at a fundamental level. Point 1. The government has executed this exact playbook before, multiple times. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented, verifiable history. Executive orders are public record. FDR's Executive Order 6102 from April 1933 is publicly available. You can read it. Nixon's August 15, 1971 announcement is recorded on video. You can watch it on YouTube right now. Current Treasury Department reports discussing modernizing gold policy frameworks are public documents. You can find them. Point 2. The wealth transfer is not accidental. It's structural and intentional. The government utilizes the revaluation mechanism to escape otherwise unpayable debt. Gold holders, those who position before the event, preserve their wealth in real purchasing power terms. Cash holders, the vast majority of the population, lose substantial purchasing power. The general population does not understand what's transpiring until after it's complete and irreversible. But the architects of the system, the Treasury officials, the Fed governors, the major banks, they position themselves accordingly in advance. Point 3. The window of opportunity is closing rapidly. The debt is at historic record levels, 128% of GDP and accelerating. Dollar credibility is declining measurably. De-dollarization is accelerating globally. Gold is at $4,600 per ounce, up 10 times since 2001. That price movement is a clear signal of confidence loss in fiat currency.
The pattern timeline suggests revaluation within 12 to 24 months from now. By the time mainstream financial media reports on it, by the time CNBC has a special segment, by the time it's trending on social media, the revaluation will already have been officially announced. You will be too late to position. The gold will be unavailable or prohibitively expensive. The opportunity will have closed. So you face a binary choice right now. Option 1, ignore the historical pattern. Hold dollars, hold bonds, hold cash and cash equivalents. Hope that this time is somehow different despite 128% debt to GDP and all the same conditions as 1933 and 1971. When the revaluation occurs, experience the wealth destruction firsthand. Watch your purchasing power evaporate in real time, exactly like what happened to citizens in 1933, exactly like what happened to dollar holders in 1971. The pattern doesn't care about your hope. Option 2, position yourself accordingly based on historical precedent. Allocate a meaningful portion of your investable assets to physical gold and, to a lesser extent, silver. Understand that you're not investing for returns. You're buying insurance against currency devaluation and debt monetization. Accept that gold doesn't increase in value. Dollars decline against it. The price in dollars rises because the dollar is being debased. Hold through short-term volatility, knowing the pattern completes regardless of month-to-month price fluctuations. The revaluation, when it arrives, will be a policy event, not a market event. Here's the final critical insight that ties everything together. The British middle class in 1931 didn't understand why their wealth and purchasing power were disappearing during the pound crisis. The American middle class in 1933 didn't understand why the government was confiscating their gold for their own good. The global population in 1971 didn't understand why their dollars suddenly purchased dramatically less after Nixon closed the gold window. But the pattern does not require your understanding. It does not require your belief. It doesn't require your consent or participation. It executes based on mathematical necessity and political expediency. The only variable, the only thing you can control, is which side of the wealth transfer you position yourself on: the government side holding the revalued asset, or the citizen side holding the devalued currency. So what happens next in this series? In the next video, I'll show you the exact mathematical calculation to determine fair value for gold in various revaluation scenarios, from conservative to aggressive. After that, the silver multiplier effect, and why silver could potentially outperform gold 3 to 1 or even 5 to 1 during a revaluation event, due to its smaller market and dual monetary and industrial role. Then the complete breakdown of which assets survive currency devaluation and which assets get destroyed, with historical evidence from every major currency crisis in the last 100 years. This channel exists to show you the pattern while it's still in progress, while you can still act, rather than explaining what happened after the wealth transfer is already complete and your opportunity is gone. If you want to see how this ends, and critically how to position yourself before it does, subscribe right now and hit notifications. If this analysis connected the dots for you, if you're starting to see the 4-stage pattern clearly, hit the like button and drop a comment below. Are you positioning for the revaluation, or do you think this time is somehow different despite identical conditions? I read every single comment. The pattern is completing. The timeline is compressing. Your window to act is closing faster than most people realize. Don't be the person who understands this perfectly in hindsight, but failed to act when it mattered.